questions have stalled on how to handle those amendments. The House coming in also at this hour. They're working today on disapproving the FCC's new broadband policy setting net neutrality rules. The House is live on C-SPAN and now live to the Senate here on C-SPAN 2.
Let us pray. Lord God Almighty, how great and wonderful are your deeds. Bless today the many people who help our senators do their work. Lord, we thank you for the many members of their staffs who help them succeed. We thank you for our pages and the significant work they do. We're grateful for those who work without fanfare to keep the legislative process going. Keep these faithful servants of freedom from growing weary in their labors. Remind them that their harvest season will come. May they never forget that faithfulness is more important to you than success. Guide them with the light of your truth until one day they will experience the joy of hearing you say, "Well done." We pray in your great name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., April 5, 2011. To the Senate, under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Jeanne Shaheen, a senator from the state of New Hampshire, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Daniel K. Inouye, President pro tempore.
Madam President.
The senator from Illinois.
Madam President, following any leader remarks, there will be a period of morning business until 11 a.m. with the Republicans controlling the first half and the majority controlling the final half. Following morning business, the Senate will proceed to consideration of H.R. 4, 1099 repeal with 1 hour of debate. Senators should expect 2 roll call votes around noon on the Menendez Amendment and passage of H.R. 4 as amended, if amended. We will recess following the votes until 2:15 p.m. for the weekly caucus meetings. We are working to reach an agreement on the small business bill and will notify senators when additional votes are scheduled. Madam President, I'm standing in this morning for the Majority Leader Reid, who has been called to the White House for a meeting with the President and the leadership, the Speaker and the leadership in the House of Representatives. The object of this is obviously to avert a government shutdown. I listened carefully to the prayer from the chaplain this morning. I don't know if we will need divine inspiration or divine interjection into this matter, but whatever it might take, I hope the people of goodwill can come to an agreement. We are close, and I don't think it is good for us as a government or as a nation to see a shutdown of basic services that may inconvenience and cause hardship across America. I yield the floor.
The Republican leader.
I suggest the evidence for quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Madam President.
The Republican leader.
Madam President, today the chairman of the House Budget Committee, Congressman Paul Ryan, is
Quorum call is in process.
Oh, I suggest that I ask consent that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Madam President, today the chairman of the House Budget Committee, Congressman Paul Ryan, is releasing a serious, detailed plan for getting our nation's fiscal house in order. Congressman Ryan's plan would put us on a path to reducing the national debt. It would strengthen the social safety net so that we can keep the promises we've made to America's seniors. It will propose a way for Washington to start living within its means. And it will repeal last year's health care law, which raised health care costs, lead to fewer jobs, and which Americans have rejected. Congressman Ryan is presenting a plan, in other words, to address our most pressing problems head-on at a moment when the President and other Democratic leaders simply refuse to do so themselves. He's doing what his constituents have sent him here to do. Anybody can say that our nation's problems need to be addressed, but history will show that Chairman Ryan is one of those who actually stepped up to do it. And he should be applauded for that by people of goodwill on both sides. Unfortunately, we already know how many Democrats intend to respond to this plan. We've heard the spin already. In the absence of any solutions of their own to a looming entitlement fiasco and the testimony of countless experts on the fiscal perils we face, Democrats intend to use Congressman Ryan's plan against anyone who supports it, despite the facts. They'll try to scare the public by claiming it says things that it doesn't. They'll squander the golden opportunity we have right now to tackle the biggest problems we face in a bipartisan way, the way our predecessors did when the two parties shared power in Washington, all in the name of having an edge in the next election. Frankly, it's shameful. Americans elect their president and senators and congressmen to lead. They don't expect us to agree on everything, but they expect us to work together when a problem becomes so pressing that cooperation across party lines is required. Now is such a moment. The debt is at crisis levels, posing a threat not just to businesses and families planning for the future, but to our national security. Since the President has taken office, nearly 3 million Americans have lost their jobs. As a result of the ongoing housing crisis, millions of homeowners are currently underwater on their mortgages. The only industry that seems to be growing is government. And the only city that seems to be isolated from problems most Americans face right now is Washington, all at taxpayers' expense. The budget debate we've been engaged in the past several weeks is a direct result of the fact that Democrats in Congress failed to pass one of their own for the current fiscal year. Republicans had to step in and do it for them. And now, 6 months into the current fiscal year, the President and Democratic leaders in Congress still have yet to produce a plan of their own. House Republicans have produced multiple plans, including one that they'll offer today, which funds our troops through the end of the year, keeps the government running, and gets us one step closer to the level of spending cuts that even the senior senator from New York has described as reasonable. Unfortunately, Democrats would rather take potshots at these proposals from the sidelines, hoping that they become unpopular with the public so they can benefit politically. They've completely and totally abdicated their responsibility. So I'd like to applaud Congressman Ryan not only for the energy and creativity and seriousness which he's brought to these issues, but also for his courage in doing so at a time when Democrats in Washington would rather sit on their hands. By stepping forward, he's forced a much-needed debate about the many crises of the moment. It's my hope that our friends on the other side recognize this effort for what it is, a serious, goodwill effort to do something good and necessary for the future of our nation, and that for the good of the nation, they'll join in this effort at some point before it's too late. Now, Madam President, on another matter, as I've traveled across Kentucky over the past year, I've heard from countless small business owners who told me how burdensome the so-called 1099 provision in the Democrats' health care bill would be to implement and how it could hamper their ability to create good private sector jobs. I hope they're tuning into the Senate floor today so they can watch the vote on its repeal. This has been a hard-fought effort, and all of the credit should go to the junior senator from Nebraska, my good friend Senator Mike Johanns. He has led this fight on behalf of the countless entrepreneurs and small business owners across the country who raised the alarm on this issue. So this is a big win for small business. Importantly, it's also the first of what I hope are many successful repeal votes related to the disastrous health spending bill the Democrats passed last year. The more Americans learn about this bill, the less they like it. We hope we can respond to their concerns with many repeal votes like the one we're going to have this morning right here in Congress. Then we will replace it with the kind of common sense reforms that will actually lower costs and encourage job creation. Once again, I want to thank Senator Johanns for his leadership and hard work on repealing this onerous provision. This is a classic example of a senator who listened to his constituents, developed a solution, won the support of his colleagues, and doggedly pursued a course of action that led to today's vote. America's small businesses can thank Senator Johanns for pushing this initiative across the finish line, and I call on the President to sign it into law. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will be in a period of morning business until 11 a.m., with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each, with the time equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees, with the Republicans controlling the first half and the majority controlling the final half. The senator from Louisiana.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, America's illegal immigration problem is clearly way out of control. We can all agree that we desperately need to better protect our borders, ensure that only citizens and legal residents can be hired for jobs in this country, and reverse misguided policies that serve as a magnet for further illegal immigration. Today, I'm introducing a bill that falls into that third category, to get rid of these magnets that encourage further illegal activity. The bill would amend the Immigration and Nationalization Act in order to change our current practice of granting automatic citizenship to the children of illegal aliens born on American soil. When it comes to U.S. citizenship, it's not just where an individual born that matters, at least it shouldn't be. The circumstances of a person's birth and the nationality of his or her parents are of at least equal importance. And I simply don't believe that our Constitution confers citizenship on children who happen to be born on U.S. soil when both of their parents are foreign tourists or illegal aliens. The Constitution does not mandate or require that. And yet, that's our policy. Each year, 300,000 to 400,000 children are born in the United States to at least one parent who's an illegal alien or a foreign tourist. A significant subset of that number includes children born to two parents who are not U.S. citizens, that category that my bill attacks. Despite the illegal status and foreign citizenship of the parent, the executive branch of our government now automatically recognizes these children as U.S. citizens upon birth. Now, this practice is not mandated by federal law or the Constitution. It's based on what I believe is a fundamental misunderstanding of the 14th Amendment of our Constitution. And as such, this policy is incompatible with both the text and legislative history of the Citizenship Clause. I don't think the 14th Amendment grants this birthright citizenship to children of illegal aliens. In fact, all we have to do is look at history and the actual text of the Constitution as our guide. The 14th Amendment doesn't say that all persons born in the U.S. are citizens, period, end of story. It states that citizenship extends to, quote, all persons born
or naturalized in the United States, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, close quote. Now, this latter phrase is important. It's conveniently ignored or misconstrued by advocates of birthright citizenship. But, of course, a fundamental rule in terms of constitutional interpretation is that words are assumed to be there for a purpose. And if those words had no meaning, had no impact, then the founders would not have written them into that part of the Constitution. Its original meaning refers to the political allegiance of an individual and the jurisdiction that a foreign government has over that person. That's why American Indians and their children didn't become citizens until Congress actually passed the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924. I'm introducing today's legislation because it's apparent that Congress must reassert its plenary authority over naturalization and make clear that, quote, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, close quote, does not include children born in this country to illegal aliens or foreign tourists. Those parents are clearly subject to the jurisdiction of foreign governments. My bill limits birthright citizenship to individuals born in the United States to at least one parent who is a legal citizen, a green card holder, or an active member of the United States Armed Forces. Congress clearly has the power to determine that children born in the U.S. to illegal aliens are not subject to American jurisdiction. As Judge Richard Posner of the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals held in a 2003 case, quote, Congress would not be flouting the Constitution if it amended the Immigration and Nationality Act to put an end to this nonsense, close quote. And that's exactly what my bill would do, put an end to this nonsense. Closing this loophole will not prevent anyone from becoming a naturalized citizen. Instead, it will ensure that he or she has to go through the same process as anyone else born of foreign national parents who wants to become a United States citizen. Now, our practice of birthright citizenship is clearly an incentive to illegal immigration, and it really does a disservice to every would-be citizen who's actually following the rules, applying to be naturalized, standing in line, often for a very long time. This misguided policy of birthright citizenship not only undermines the stability of our immigration system, but it has severe fiscal consequences as well as serious national security implications. Recent news reports have highlighted the growing popularity of what is known as, quote, birth tourism, close quote. Websites actually advertise birth packages for foreign visitors so that pregnant women can give birth in the United States and ensure automatic citizenship under current practice for their newborn children. And, of course, with that automatic citizenship comes the full benefits thereof, including unlimited travel to the U.S., educational benefits, and the ability to settle here as an adult, and eventually down the line, the ability to grab back the parents and get them into U.S. citizenship. One such agency that appeals to foreign mothers-to-be by describing the benefits of American-born children, pointing out that a one-time investment in a birth package will result in a lifetime of benefits for their family, was in the news recently. And specifically, it says your children will be able to attend U.S. public elementary schools, and they may apply for scholarships designated for U.S. citizens, and they're entitled to welfare benefits. All of this explicitly spelled out in the advertising for this agency. Just last month, authorities in California shut down a makeshift maternity clinic after discovering 10 newborns and a dozen Chinese women who paid as much as $35,000 to travel to this country to give birth to children who would automatically be recognized as U.S. citizens. Now, birth tourism, as amazing as this is not a new phenomenon, as women from other countries have long traveled to the U.S. legally on tourist or student visas and given birth while here. However, recent reports indicate that the practice is escalating. A new report by the Center for Immigration Studies finds that every year 200,000 children are born to women who were lawfully admitted to the United States on a temporary basis. Each of these children receive U.S. citizenship despite their mother's allegiance to a different country, and even if the father is not a U.S. citizen. Birth tourism is certainly a reprehensible practice, but it's not an illegal one. It's astounding that the U.S. government allows individuals to exploit the loopholes of our immigration system in this manner, and it's obvious that Congress has the authority and the obligation to put an end to it. In addition to this birth tourism, and by that I refer to focusing on tourists here legally under a tourist visa, of course there are tens or hundreds of thousands of children born in this country to two illegal immigrant parents. And those children, under the same practice, automatically become U.S. citizens. And this, too, is a very dangerous practice, a magnet to attract more and more illegal activity across the border when we say we want to do everything to stop that. Well, certainly, if we truly want to do everything we can to stop that, we need to unplug those magnets, stop that policy from attracting more and more illegal crossings across the border.
Reached his 10-minute limit.
Madam President, if I could have unanimous consent for 30 additional seconds.
Object. Madam President, I was scheduled for 10 minutes immediately following the senator from Louisiana, and if he'd amend his UC to include my 10 minutes, full minutes following him, I won't object.
I'd be happy to do that, Madam President.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. And so, Madam President, I introduced this important legislation today, and I thank Senators Paul and Lee and Moran for joining me in addressing this critical issue. I invite all the members of the Senate to join me in doing this. And I yield the floor, Madam President.
Madam President.
The Senator from Oklahoma.
Madam President, we hear a lot about the disaster, the things that are taking place, and the loss of lives in Libya, and as well as many other places, particularly the last few months. But going seemingly unnoticed is probably just as great a disaster that's happening in Cote d'Ivoire right now as we speak. I came to the floor yesterday, and I talked about the fact that there were elections took place in Cote d'Ivoire last November. The incumbent president, Laurent Gbagbo, was challenged by Alassane Ouattara. They claim that Ouattara won the election. Ouattara comes from the north, the Muslim area up there, and then we found so much voter fraud that we identified and we specifically talked about on the Senate floor that I've asked Secretary Clinton by letter twice to intervene and demand a new election. Now, when I say voter fraud, I entered this in the record yesterday, so I won't do it again today. But this shows how they miscalculated all of those votes up in the north. In just one precinct, 1,000 votes. Well, actually, 94,873. Now, obviously, if we have 100,000 or so votes in one precinct, it can happen that way. But just use logic. If all else fails, stop and think about this. How could it be possible that in the northern part of Cote d'Ivoire, that when they had the election, what we would call the primary election, President Gbagbo got thousands of votes in each one of the precincts. And yet, when the runoff came, he got 0. That is a statistical impossibility. And I think for those of us, certainly the United States thought that UN and perhaps France was accurate in their initial response to this thing, but we're going to have to get something done. Let me go ahead and finish what happened I mentioned yesterday. In the town of Duquay, the Ouattara's forces, along with the French, went in there, murdered about, we'd think it's something over 1,000 people. We get the reports from the Red Cross and from other sources. But when Ouattara has tried to deny his involvement in the slaughter, his forces took the town earlier, and this was a week after the Gbagbo forces had gone. And I think we could just look at Jammeh Ngefu, who is the deputy head of the United Nations mission in Cote d'Ivoire. He said that the Ouattara's forces had carried out the killings in Dikwe. Quote, "We have evidence, we have pictures, this was retaliation." And so we have all this evidence that I mentioned yesterday was a part of it. I read yesterday from The Guardian, the British Guardian, the UN mission has traditional hunters known as Dozos fought alongside Ouattara's forces and took part in killing 330 people in the western town of Dikwe, which we now know is over 1,000 people. The International Committee of Red Cross said at least 800 people. And it goes on, which I made a part of the record yesterday. But in addition to that, we have a statement that was made in the BBC yesterday. Keep in mind now, they have in Dikwe, they murdered all these people. They have mass graves. The people are charred and burned. And I'm going to quote right now, so hold your stomachs. "I spot 4 pigs eating something dark and charred in the courtyard, standing by a newly dug mass grave. A UN soldier from Morocco is choking with rage and grief. I ask him if the dead are children. He nods and begins to sob quietly into his face mask." So we know this disaster is taking place, and here we do nothing, and we know about it. And I just will say, America, wake up. The massacre could have been avoided if Ouattara had accepted the mediation effort from the African Union. President Gbagbo did accept, Ouattara did not, and he rejected it, and I think we know why he rejected it, because he wants that power, he wants that job. Well, anyway, where we are now, and I'm going to try to get this all in, the United States I think, should call for the ceasefire and for a new election. I have also been told within the last day that the United Nations helicopters, U.S. peacekeeping helicopters, are firing upon Gbagbo's military camp. Lastly, I've sent a letter to the Foreign Relations Committee Chairman John Kerry. Let me applaud John Kerry. He has agreed to hold a hearing to look at this. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate it, because it takes courage to stand up against the United Nations and France and our State Department and admit that we have to look into this thing. So that's exactly what we're going to do. But that was yesterday on the floor. What's happened? What happened last night? Last night, the job was finished. They went in and they massacred I don't know how many people. You see, President Gbagbo had young children that were surrounding his palace and his residence, and they're willing to sacrifice their lives to save their country from the French influence that they're getting with Ouattara. And they were armed with baseball bats and 2x4s. I don't know, there are hundreds of them out there. And last night, Sarkozy had gone to the Secretary General Moon and said, "Use my forces to end this," and they did, and we know what happened last night. Maybe you don't know what happened last night. They went in with helicopters and with rockets, and they destroyed most of a town, of a major city, Abidjan, the capital of Côte d'Ivoire. And we have evidence. I hope that people will take advantage of this, particularly those people. I know there are a lot of people out there that are just opposed to any intervention that we have, and they don't really care about sub-Saharan Africa. No one cares about sub-Saharan Africa. I've stood on this floor time and time again, back when we were sending troops into Bosnia, and the excuse was ethnic cleansing. I said, for every one day in any town, in any country in sub-Saharan Africa, there are more people ethnically cleansed than any day in Bosnia. But nobody seems to care. So we have hundreds of kids around there, and last night they were mowed down. If anyone questions this, you can access on my internet, inhofe.senate.gov, and get the YouTube that shows graphically what they are doing. I don't know how many hundreds, how many thousands of people have been brutally murdered last night by the French supporting Ouattara, and it's something that we need to get involved in. And when I look at President Obiang, who's from Equatorial Guinea, he's the chairman of the African Union. He says he condemned the foreign intervention in Ivory Coast. And we stand by idly and we don't do anything about it. So again, I'm going to renew my request to Secretary Clinton and to the State Department and to others who really care about the loss of innocent life in sub-Saharan Africa, specifically in Abidjan in Côte d'Ivoire, to come forward and help us in this hearing to find that justice is done. I hope that President Gbagbo and his wife Simone, good friends, I hope they're not dead today. They might be dying as we speak. They're raiding their residence, they're raiding the palace, and it's a brutal mess. So I don't think I've ever seen in the years that I've been here, particularly coming from French, supported by Sarkozy, the raid on innocent lives in sub-Saharan Africa. And with that, I will yield the floor. And if no one else comes in, I'm going to talk longer. All right. I ask unanimous consent that I be permitted to speak until someone comes in to speak.
Without objection.
Madam President, I guess you might wonder why I'm concerned about this. I've had an interest in sub-Saharan Africa for quite some time, and after 9/11, finally, the United States of America decided they would do something of concern in sub-Saharan Africa. And so what we have had since that time is an interest in helping them to build African brigades as the terrorists come down through the Horn of Africa and Djibouti, and they come into the continent of Africa. We need to help the Africans build brigades so that they can resist them. Not doing it for them, not doing it in place of the Africans doing it, but to help them so they can defend themselves. That's exactly what we've been doing. And I've been honored to be kind of the point man on the Armed Services Committee to go over and work with these guys. Our countries in Africa are our friends. They participate in programs like the IMET program that allows us to train their officers in the United States of America, like the Train and Equip program that allows us to work with them and train these individuals. And so when you see something, an atrocity like this that takes place, and you just visualize the young kids that are out there being brutally murdered, it's something that we should do something about. Again, I'm going to praise someone who philosophically I've not agreed with most of the time that I've spent here in the United States Senate. That's Senator John Kerry. He's the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee. I'm on that committee, as well as the Armed Services Committee, and he is very sympathetic to what's going on over there and has agreed to having a hearing. There's a man named Mel Teodoro. Mel Teodoro was the mayor of, when I first met him, mayor of Abidjan in Cote d'Ivoire. He is currently a member of parliament in Cote d'Ivoire. He is the head of an opposing party, political party to President Gbagbo in Cote d'Ivoire, and yet he has come, in fact, he was a candidate against President Gbagbo. He was a candidate against him when he ran successfully for president. Now, here's a guy who would have every reason to be opposed to President Gbagbo, and yet he is willing to testify before Senator Kerry's committee that not only did they rig the election, but if he just used and showed the documentation on rigging the election, that we should be in a position where we could strongly recommend that we have that we recommend another election. I have nothing against Alassane Ouattara, except I do know that he has been an enemy of the Gbagbos since long before 2002, when he was opposed to him. This is, I guess, the final kill. But what expense is this coming? It's coming at a high expense of a number of that we can't quantify today. If you don't believe it, look it up, and you can get the YouTube site, and you can watch what happened last night, and you can get that off of my website, inhofe.senate.gov. Now, I see that my very good friend, Senator Manchin, a new senator from West Virginia. Before I yield the floor to him, I want to applaud him for his being courageous and standing up for doing something about the EPA taking over the regulation of greenhouse gases that would put coal and oil and gas out of our reach in this country. So I applaud you, Senator Manchin, and I yield the floor.
The senator from West Virginia.
First of all, I want to thank my good friend for his hard work also, and we are working in a very bipartisan manner. Madam President, I rise today to mark the tragic occasion of the worst U.S. mining disaster in 40 years. A year ago today, 29 brave and patriotic men went underground to mine the coal that powers our great nation, and they didn't come back. Our entire nation grieved with their families for their tremendous loss. And I rise today to honor their courage, sacrifice, and the extraordinary strength of their families. I want to say a few words about the proud men and women today who go underground and go unrecognized and make sure that our great nation can keep the lights on. When some people see a coal miner walk out from underground, they see someone who is tired, wearing dust-covered overalls, steel boots, carrying a hard hat and a dinner bucket, and they make a few flawed assumptions about the amount of education they may or may not have, or that they had nowhere else to turn, that was the only job available. I want everyone to know that those assumptions are dead wrong. West Virginia coal miners are the backbone of this country, providing the power for the lights in this chamber, the steel and the machinery that build our country, the greatest industrial power in the world, the military that keeps us safe and free, and the energy for homes and businesses all over this country. West Virginia miners understand geology, mathematics, and physics, the way a seam runs through the earth and how to safely extract its bounty to make our country stronger. Above all, West Virginia miners are the salt of the earth, patriotic, God-fearing, family-loving, and family-oriented, and proud of their hard work. In our state, we've always done the heavy lifting. We are very proud of what we've contributed to this country, and time and again, in times of war, times of peace, in times of prosperity, and times of need. At a time when our nation's attention and misplaced pity will again focus on coal miners because of the first anniversary of the worst mining disaster in the last 40 years, we West Virginians want the world to know that we are proud of our coal mining heritage and our future. As West Virginia's former governor and now U.S. Senator, I want to tell the Americans not only about our sacrifice, but also our dedication to our shared future. The miners of West Virginia and their families are the heart and soul of West Virginia and an inspiration for me and my family. We should all draw strength from their courage that they've shown us all. Now allow me to turn to the terrible day a year ago. And remembering the Upper Big Branch disaster, my thoughts turn first to the families of the 29 miners who went to work that day on April the 5th, 2010, and didn't come home. In the days following the violent explosion, which remains under investigation today, I spent all day and every day for 5 days waiting to find out with the families if their loved ones were alive or dead. Those families and I stayed together at midnight and at dawn through moments of hope and despair, on pins and needles in the early days, and in shared grief when the full scope of the devastation hit us as the rescuers didn't find any more survivors. We prayed together before and after each briefing. We recited the Pledge of Allegiance. We held each other and cried together. Restaurant owners donated food. Our own WVU's coach Bobby Huggins came and visited. And one young man, Nick Helms, who I remember so well, whose father was killed in the Sago mining disaster in 2006, he came down personally and he offered his moral support from his firsthand experiences. In those days, the unbreakable bonds of family became very clear. One family alone lost 3 good men. I first told Charles and Linda Davis, the parents of Timmy, and the grandparents of Corey and Josh. I told Tommy, and Tommy was another brother who had worked in the mine, just came off the shift. And Tommy was the father of Corey. And I also told Patty, large families, and Patty as their daughter of Linda and Charles, and she was Josh's mother. So we had, in the mine, we had Timmy, the uncle, and we had Josh and Corey. All 3 men had been found, but they had perished. The first question I got from Tommy after I told his parents, he said, "Joe, were they all together?" And I said, "Yes, they were, Tommy." Tommy replied to me, he says, "I knew my brother Timmy would be taking care of the boys." That was not my state's first mining disaster or mine. When I was a young man, my own family went through the tragedy of the Farmington No. 9 explosion in 1968. 78 miners were killed that day, and it left a searing impression on me. Of course, we didn't know right away how bad it would get. Everyone camped out at the company store. We were all waiting for any word before the authorities finally came and they told us all that the decision had been made to seal the mine, which essentially was entombing all of them, and the rescue was over. In that disaster, I lost my uncle, I lost my next-door neighbor, I lost some of my high school classmates. One of my strongest lessons that has stayed with me to this day is that waiting families should be systematically updated on the progress of a rescue operation. I know firsthand that a minute seems like an hour seems like a day, and a day seems like eternity. With consistent updates, the waiting becomes a little more bearable. During my term as governor and the three tragedies we went through, which was Sago, Aracoma, and last year Upper Big Branch, we briefed the families every 2 hours. It was a cycle that we received a briefing from our authorities, then we went and briefed the families, then we told the media. And it was a cycle we continued until the fate of all of our miners were known. We've learned a lot in West Virginia. After disasters at Sago and Aracoma, we enacted more safety measures in my term as governor than in the 30 years before. We've become a leader in safety, and what we're implementing is being used across all types of mining all over our country and around the world. The bottom line is that in our state, we won't tolerate intimidation from any person or company that puts profits ahead of safety. And I truly believe that the single most important element in any mining operation is the men and women who work there every day. Under my watch, we empowered those individual miners and their families to take more ownership and control over their own safety without fear of retribution, with a 24-hour anonymous hotline to report unsafe conditions. Since May of last year, we've had 86 calls, and we responded. At the end of the day, though, the families, the people of West Virginia, and all Americans need to know how this tragedy happened and what we must do to prevent anything this terrible from ever happening again. We are still waiting for the results of the federal and state investigations, as well as an independent report from my special appointed investigator, J. Davitt McAteer, a West Virginia native and an assistant secretary for the Mine Safety and Health Administration under President Bill Clinton. We will look at the results of their investigation to determine what happened, make certain it doesn't happen again, and determine whether anyone, through intimidation or otherwise, put profits ahead of safety and that the people responsible are held accountable. In the meantime, I am co-sponsoring a piece of legislation with Senator Jay Rockefeller, the Robert C. Byrd Mine and Workplace Safety and Health Act of 2011. It is designed to improve compliance with existing mine and occupational safety and health laws, empower workers to raise safety concerns, prevent future mine and other workplace tragedies, and establish the rights of the families of victims of workplace accidents. Last week, I spoke again to Tommy Davis, the man who lost his brother, his nephew, and his son at the Upper Big Branch mine. When I asked him what he was doing these days, Tommy gave me a simple answer. He said, "Joe, I'm back in the mines." Tommy is proud to be a miner, and while he and all of us have much to mourn today, we also have the chance to honor the memories of the 29 dedicated men who died a year ago and their colleagues who continue their work with respect and dignity. Finally, Gail and I and all West Virginians pray for continued strength and courage for the families who lost loved ones on this sad day a year ago. May God bless each one of them. May God bless the great state of West Virginia. May God continue to bless the United States of America. Thank you, Madam President, and I ask the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
The senator from New Jersey.
I ask unanimous consent.